Hi, everyone. Welcome to Being Patient, our special series on diversity and dementia. I'm Deborah Kahn, founder of Being Patient. Today, we are going to talk to Luisa Echevarria. She is a Cuban American who is an Alzheimer's advocate and had a mom and a grandmother who both passed away from Alzheimer's disease. Luisa, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm always happy to talk about my story in hopes that it helps other families living with Alzheimer's.
So, Luisa, one thing that really, when I read with interest your story, I realized, you were only a child, about 13 or 14 years old, when
Correct.
your grandmother started showing signs of dementia.
Correct.
But yet she was really never diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Tell us a little bit about that.
No, so I grew up during the revolution. I was able to come to the United States in 1961. I came alone. My parents came a few months after. I lived with an aunt and uncle. My grandmother and my aunt and uncle were not able to get out until 1967. So you have to understand that she was starting to act a little funny, but we were living through a revolution. Everybody, it's kind of like, I sometimes equate it to what we're going through with the pandemic. It's something that shook your world, completely changed the way we were living. So when she came to the United States, I had not seen her. So I left in 1961. She came around 1967. So it had been around 6 years. Now, the grandmother I remembered was, funny, and she was my rock, because living through a revolution, and we lived in Matanzas, which is a pretty large city, and there was a lot of activity there. So I would often be afraid. I had terrible fears at night. And she lived with us at the time. So she would come in my room and tell me stories and sing me songs. And when she came, I noticed that there was sort of a lost look in her eyes, and she was repeating the same thing over and over. She would become very anxious and agitated. My parents and I lived in one home, and then my aunt and uncle and grandmother lived a few blocks away. So I would be with her every day, but I didn't live there. So I would go after school to sort of keep an eye on her. And I would notice that she would ask me, what time is your aunt coming home? And then she'd ask over and over and get really agitated. So I thought, this is not normal. But I was a teenager. I wasn't really that
We're not
keen.
really thinking of dementia when
we never knew. And what she had been diagnosed with in Cuba was arterial sclerosis, hardening of the arteries or whatever. And they said that was causing the dementia. But again, the medical care was sketchy in the middle of a revolution. And then when my aunt, uncle, and grandmother came, we took her to a doctor who didn't speak Spanish. Someone had to translate. We just didn't have a clue. And that's one of the things that I think, why I advocate for bilingual, bicultural services for persons living with dementia and their caregivers, because it's very difficult to sort of navigate that when you have a language issue and a cultural issue. As I mentioned earlier, she was very isolated because my aunt and uncle both worked. I mean, we're recent immigrants. Everybody has to go to work. I was in school, so she was home alone all day. There was no Spanish language television. I'm always sort of proud of the fact that I spent 30 years working at Univision in Spanish language media, and really how that changed our community in many ways, because people were able to be entertained in their language, to be able to, hear the news, find out what was going on. it would have made a huge difference for her. I used to get home from school and we would watch the dating game together, and I would explain to her what was going on. And she was just, her isolation must have been profound. And as a result, she declined so quickly.
In your family at that time, did you have any experience with Alzheimer's? Did you guys even know what Alzheimer's was?
No, not at all. You again, you have to understand, in Cuba, and here for that matter, people did not live as long. The main cause of Alzheimer's is age. So, my grandmother's mother, for example, died of tuberculosis at a young age. So the diseases that took their lives were very different. And we didn't have any way of knowing that this was Alzheimer's. I was a child when I left, but my mother said, she didn't remember publications or anything on television or anything that spoke about Alzheimer's.
Did your grandmother ever get a diagnosis of Alzheimer's?
No, my grandmother.
She died not knowing that she died
Alzheimer's, not knowing that she had Alzheimer's, and really pretty much sort of completely unplugged from what was happening around her. So it was really devastating for our family to have survived a revolution, to have come to the United States. We would always say, well, yeah, we left everything behind, we lost everything, but we still have our memories. Well, we didn't have that with her. It was gone.
Did you as a family realize that, like, when was the first time you thought, oh my gosh, this could be Alzheimer's disease?
We didn't, because we didn't know as a family. And again, I was a teenager. I don't know if my mother and my aunt talked about it, but they certainly kept it away from me. They didn't say the word Alzheimer's. They just said, your grandmother's going through something, it's difficult to live in a new country. She doesn't speak English. We made her comfortable. We didn't get her any kind of treatment. Not that there was much available in the late 60s. I mean, we talked about, fast forward to when my mother developed the disease. I was able to get her to a neurologist right away. She took Aricept right away. So my mother showed signs of the disease when she was in her late 60s, early 70s. She passed at the age of 84. And really had severe symptoms of the disease only the last 2 or 3 years. So it really is a function of culture, immigration, assimilation. How many years have you been in the United States? How well do you know the lay of the land? How well can you access medical care? And for my mother, it was very different outcome.
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me? I think I'm
Yes.
having an internet issue. Okay, good.
Yes.
I can really only imagine that how hard that must have been, when you realized your mom had Alzheimer's disease. Does the family know if there's a genetic link there? Because with the predominance of like a grandmother and a maternal, mother and grandmother with Alzheimer's.
There is, I'm quite sure that there is. But again, my grandmother lived longer than her mother. My mother lived far longer than her mother. So, I don't know what the genetic link is. When I can have genetic testing, I would do it, because again, I'm part of that study, the Rush Latino Alzheimer's, Rush University Hospital Latino Alzheimer's study. And I want to know, I want to do everything I can. I live a very healthy lifestyle. I do all of the things. I, follow the MIND diet. So I'm doing everything I can. But I think it's a very complex situation when you're coming from another country and you just don't have access to care.
Yeah.
That is, there was a little quote that I saw. There are approximately 4 million Latinos over the age of 65 living in the US, and Latino families are highly under-resourced in terms of income, retirement benefits, and pension benefits. As the Latino population ages, a growing number of communities, families, and systems of care will be confronted by the growing crisis of Alzheimer's disease with fewer resources to manage it. And that's one of the things that I'm really proud. One of the things that has helped me tremendously is when I joined the Alzheimer's Foundation of America, I felt like I have a community now. I have other people who have lived through various stages of this. Our founder and chairman, Bert Brodsky, lived through this. Of course, they had lived in the United States for many years. He had access to care. Still, they struggled in the sense that he didn't know how to handle some of these things. He said, I didn't know what I was doing wrong. I didn't know what I was doing right. Same thing for us. Very much so with my grandmother. With my mother's disease, we knew we had much better resources, much better information, and the United States had caught up to Latino health and systems. Health systems were, my mother was able to go to many Spanish-speaking doctors. So they were able to catch things that, for my grandmother.
What did your mom, tell us a little bit about her diagnosis? I mean, you mentioned it was helpful to have, I'm assuming your mom, did she speak English as well though?
She did.
Okay.
So yeah, because again, they came in the, shortly after I arrived in the early 60s. My mother, and father both knew a little English, but then they became very proficient. We lived back then, there weren't that many Latinos. You had to learn English and you had to learn it fast. The truth is. So yes, she was completely bilingual.
When we speak to other people for this series, in particular in the African American community, dementia is like a not spoken about thing.
Correct.
Culturally.
Correct.
Because it's something you kind of hide. You don't want to talk about it because that means it's actually really happening. Is it like that in the Latino community?
Oh my God.
Would you say?
Even more so. I equally or worse, because the stigma attached to Alzheimer's, and no one wants to open up and talk about it. I have had friends whose mother, I have a male friend whose mother had Alzheimer's, and I would say to him, there are things you can do. There's information, you can share your story. And he was like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want anybody to know that she has the disease. I felt, and I too felt this way in the beginning when I would share my stories through Alzheimer's Foundation. I've had a chance to speak before a lot of groups. And I will tell you that I would often feel like I was betraying my mother's memory. I felt, oh, she would have been embarrassed. She wouldn't have wanted people to know this. My mom was very glamorous and very outgoing. And I thought, oh, she would hate this. And then one day I just suddenly got past it. And I thought, you know what? I am doing this. It's painful for me too, for me to talk about her disease. However, I do it to honor her memory and the way that she fought the disease and the way, the dignity with which she continued to live, and also to honor my father, who never developed dementia and lived to his, into his early 90s. How difficult, I can't even begin to explain. They had retired, they had moved to Miami, they had so many wonderful plans, and to see everything, my dad had suffered through, the loss of his father, who was not able to come from Cuba, losing his business in Cuba, rebuilding everything in the United States. And then my mom's disease was really work with each other and help through it. But it was do encourage people to talk about. We had Univision sponsored an Alzheimer's conference, and we had no idea. We publicized it. We did public service announcements, And I said, this is the first time we're doing this. I have no idea if 10 people are going to show up. No one shows up. We had over 300 people show up. They wanted information, they wanted resources, but I was so happy to see that a lot of them wanted to talk about what they were living through. And I think as we open up as a community, as we open up as a society to, to what's out there, if people go to the Alzheimer's Foundation of America website, alzfdn.org. You can see we have a Spanish language site. You can see all of the different events that are taking place. We've started doing Latino Brain Health Summits. We did one in Chicago in July, virtually, of course. We have publications. This one is racial disparities and their impact on dementia. So it's really important to expand the conversation about Alzheimer's and to include minorities. That is, I can't stress that enough.
And you are doing in your advocacy too. I mean, you have the advocacy on one side, and then you're actually contributing to science. So tell us a little bit about what it's been like to participate in a clinical trial and what you're getting out of it.
It's been wonderful because the clinical trial, we do all get together for different events. So we all know that we're participating in the clinical get together. We talk about, almost all of us have a grandparent who had some form of dementia. So to be able to talk about it and say, you know what, we're not going to freak out. We're going to keep, putting one foot in front of the other and keep living our lives and doing everything we can do to fight for resources for underserved communities and to find a cure. I want a cure.
Yeah.
If I get that diagnosis, I want to know there's something on the horizon, something's coming. And I think that, we're certainly heading in the right direction with that.
Well, Luisa Echevarria, thank you so much for joining us. The work is so important, the awareness, especially as you point out, especially among beating cultural stereotypes and as you're doing, really getting more people to understand the research and also just to make dementia not a bad word, which I think is so important.
I completely agree. And every chance I get, I talk about it. Every time I'm invited to speak before a group, I take the opportunity. I'm not always comfortable speaking in front of a large group. I'm not comfortable at all on Zoom, but I do it to honor my grandmother and my mother and to help anyone who needs assistance.
Well, you've done a great job today on Zoom. So thank you so much for your time and sharing your story. For more on this series, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter, beingpatient.com, or go to our website. And you can see people's stories like Luisa's. I should mention that this series was brought to you in support with ESI, a human healthcare company, and we're grateful to bring light and attention to stories like Luisa. So thank you so much, Luisa, for joining us. Have a great day, and
you as well.
good luck with all of your work.
Thank you so much.